Imagine a peaceful church shattered by a cop's heavy boots, accusing a priest of crimes he didn't commit until the truth turns the tables. In Boise, Idaho, Father Samuel Carter's quiet service took a wild turn when Officer Ryan Mercer stormed in, suspicion blazing. Get ready for a gripping tale of faith, confrontation, and redemption that'll keep you on edge. If you're intrigued, please consider subscribing. It'd mean a lot to us. The atmosphere inside the small church was bathed in sunlight, humming with an almost sacred stillness. The congregation had just finished their final hymn, their voices still lingering softly beneath the high vaulted ceiling. Father Samuel Carter, the church's newly appointed priest, stood at the pulpit, his deep, warm voice offering the closing prayer. At 55, born in 1970, dressed in his white vestments, he exuded both serenity and authority, drawing the quiet attention of the faithful. As the service concluded, Father Carter stepped down, offering warm handshakes and friendly smiles to the parishioners as they made their way out. It was a harmonious scene, a glimpse of a world where people coexisted in peace. Then came the heavy sound of footsteps on the tiled floor, shattering the calm. A uniformed police officer, a tall man with broad shoulders, stepped into the sanctuary. His dark sunglasses hid his eyes, but the rigid stance and clenched jaws said enough. He wasn't here to pray. Father Carter. Officer Ryan Mercer's voice was cold, devoid of politeness. Yes, officer. How may I help you? Father Carter responded calmly, though he noted the tension in the man's posture. Officer Mercer gave a curt nod but didn't remove his sunglasses. We received reports of some suspicious activity here, he said, glancing around the church, as if expecting to uncover a hidden crime scene. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions? Father Carter smiled faintly, unfazed by the implied accusation. Of course, he said. But may I ask what kind of suspicious activity you're referring to? Officer Mercer didn't answer right away. His gaze flickered over Father Carter's dark skin, his clerical robes, and then to the lingering parishioners. Is this your church? His tone dropped slightly, but the suspicion remained. Yes, it is, Father Carter replied steadily. I've been serving here for 11 months now. Officer Mercer crossed his arms. Interesting. We received reports of unusual gatherings, late-night meetings. Would you know anything about that? Father Carter tilted his head slightly, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. He could feel the weight of unspoken words in Mercer's tone, like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. The remaining parishioners stood still, unsure whether to stay or slip away quietly. They glanced at Father Carter, their concern evident, but he gestured subtly for them to remain at ease. Late-night meetings. Father Carter mused. Officer, this is the house of God. The doors are always open. People come here to pray, to seek guidance, or to find peace in difficult times. Would you like to join us one evening? Officer Mercer's face hardened, his jaw tightening visibly. I didn't come here for a sermon, Father, he said flatly, his voice so sharp that a few nearby parishioners shivered. Let's get to the point. We've had complaints about certain individuals hanging around here. Some of them match particular descriptions. Father Carter raised an eyebrow, his composure unshaken. Particular descriptions? You mean individuals of a certain skin color? Officer Mercer stiffened. I didn't say that. You didn't have to, Father Carter replied gently, his voice unwavering. He stepped forward, not aggressively, but making it clear he would not back down. This church welcomes everyone, officer. If someone is uncomfortable with the people who walk through these doors, I'd say that speaks more about them than it does about us. Officer Mercer removed his sunglasses, his sharp green eyes narrowing as he studied Father Carter. Look, I'm just doing my job. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to worry about. Then perhaps you'd like to search the church, Father Carter suggested, gesturing toward the sanctuary. His voice remained firm. But there was something else beneath it, something that made Officer Mercer hesitate for just a moment. Would that ease your concerns? For a moment, Officer Ryan Mercer looked uncertain, unsure of how to respond. But instead of answering, his gaze swept across the rows of pews, the altar, and the remaining congregation. His silence spoke volumes, and the atmosphere in the room grew heavier. Officer Ryan Mercer stepped forward, the echo of his boots on the tiled floor carrying a sense of quiet intimidation. His eyes landed on a young boy standing near the front row, clutching his mother's hand. The boy, Noah Bennett, couldn't have been older than 10, born in 2015. He looked up at Officer Mercer with wide, innocent eyes. The officer's gaze lingered a bit too long, and Father Carter noticed how the mother instinctively pulled her son closer. "Are you sure there's nothing or no one here that doesn't belong?" Officer Mercer asked, his voice lowering but heavy with implication. The meaning behind his words was clear to everyone. Father Carter clasped his hands in front of his chest, his expression remaining calm, though his voice took on a S. Mercer edge. "Officer, this is the house of God. Everyone belongs here." Officer Mercer let out a short, derisive laugh and shook his head. "A nice sentiment, Father, but don't take it too far. You can't just open your doors to anyone. That's how trouble starts." His eyes flicked back toward young Noah Bennett once more. "You never know what kind of people might be lurking around here." A ripple of shock passed through the small congregation. An elderly woman in the back whispered, "What is he trying to say?" Another parishioner discreetly pulled out their phone and began recording, sensing the rising tension. Father Carter remained composed. "Officer, if you have a specific accusation, state it plainly. If not, please don't make baseless insinuations about the people in this church." The officer smirked and leaned in slightly. "I'm not here to debate theology, Father. I'm here to make sure everything stays under control." "You mean to make sure no one here looks too different by your standards?" Father Carter countered, his voice calm but sharp. The officer stiffened, his smirk vanishing. "You've got quite the sharp tongue for a priest. And you've got quite the prejudice for a law enforcement officer." The entire room fell silent. The officer's voice turned cold. "We received reports of a tall black man, someone who looks a lot like you, wandering around here at night. That's suspicious. So tell me, what exactly are you doing here?" A wave of murmurs and whispers spread through the room, but Father Carter remained steady. "I tend to my flock, counsel lost souls, and serve this community." "But I suppose that's not the answer you were looking for, is it?" The officer smirked again, but this time the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Nice words. But words don't mean much when you're hiding something. So why don't you show me what's behind those doors?" He gestured toward the hallway leading to the rooms in the back of the church, his implication clear. Gasp rippled through the congregation. An elderly man stepped forward, his voice shaking with anger. "You have no right to accuse Father Carter of anything. He has done nothing but good for the community." Officer Mercer shot the man a sharp glare. "Step aside, sir. This doesn't concern you." "Oh, but it does," Father Carter interjected, his voice carrying enough weight to silence the murmurs. "It concerns everyone here because what you're doing, officer, isn't just questioning me. You're questioning this entire community. You're questioning our faith, our unity, and our dignity." Officer Mercer rolled his eyes. "Enough, Father. Are you going to cooperate, or do I need to escalate this?" Father Carter tilted his head, meeting the officer's gaze with a calm yet piercing look that made the man uneasy. Then, with a faint smile, he said, "Please, officer, escalate." The officer blinked, clearly caught off guard. "What?" I said. Father Carter repeated, his voice steady. "Escalate. Call your backup and search the entire church. Turn over every pew, every hymn book, every candle. Do whatever you feel is necessary to satisfy your suspicion. But when it's all done, and when you find nothing, I expect a public apology. Not just to me, but to my congregation." The officer's face reddened as he realized all eyes were on him. His hand hovered over his radio, hesitating, rating a church full of families, elderly people, and children wouldn't go unnoticed. Murmurs grew louder. Father Carter took a step forward, his voice low but firm. "You know, officer, searching for something that isn't there reveals more about the searcher than the thing being sought. What do you expect to find? Or is using me enough?" The officer pressed his lips together. "I'm here to ensure the community's safety." "Safety from whom? A priest? Or from people who look like me?" "That's not what I said," he snapped. "But it's what you implied." A woman raised her phone. "I've been recording everything. If you want to escalate, we'll make sure everyone sees how you treat a priest." The officer's eyes narrowed as he struggled to regain control. "You're turning this into a spectacle." Father Carter shook his head. "No, you did that the moment you walked in here and decided that I, because of the color of my skin, must be guilty." The room buzzed with outrage. The officer clenched his jaw and then suddenly pulled out a small notepad. "Fine," he said gruffly, cutting through the noise. "Since you insist on playing the victim, Father Carter, let's make this official. Name and ID." Gasp rippled through the congregation. People exchanged shocked glances. An elderly woman in the back muttered, This is disgraceful. Father Carter remained composed, his eyes never leaving the officer. Name and ID, he repeated, a hint of disbelief in his tone. I've already told you who I am. Now I need verification, the officer replied, his voice challenging. Anyone can wear a priest's collar. Silence fell over the room as every gaze locked onto the officer. Slowly, Father Carter reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and held it out. My identification is right here, he said evenly. But before you open it, I have a question. The officer gripped the wallet tightly. What? Why are you really here, officer? Father Carter asked. You stormed into a church and interrupted a service without any evidence. What exactly are you looking for? The officer hesitated, then quickly flipped open the wallet and read the name on the ID. Samuel Carter, ha. Looks valid. He begrudgingly handed it back. Are you satisfied now? Father Carter asked. The officer hesitated before gesturing toward a hallway. I still want to check back there. The congregation protested loudly, but Father Carter raised a hand to silence them. Go ahead, but be careful what you're about to find. The officer strode down the hallway, opening doors. All he found were hymn books and choir robes. Then he reached a slightly ajar door with dim light spilling out. He stepped inside and froze. Inside there were blankets, food, and a small table with a steaming cup of coffee. Two men, one elderly and frail, the other young and weary, sat there in worn-out clothes. What is this? The officer muttered. Father Carter stood in the doorway, calm as ever. This is our outreach program. Every night, the church opens its doors to those with nowhere else to go. The officer looked at the two men, realizing they weren't suspects, just people seeking warmth and compassion. Officer Ryan Mercer opened his mouth but then closed it again. For a moment he seemed lost. I don't know, he mumbled, his voice losing much of its firmness. No, you don't, Father Carter said as he stepped into the room. But you judged anyway. You assumed that this church, this community, and even I were guilty before you even sought the truth. Officer Mercer's face tensed, caught between shame and defensiveness. I was just doing my job, he weakly justified. And your job, Father Carter replied, his voice firm but not harsh, is to protect and serve, not to discriminate or harass. The room fell into silence. Officer Mercer was clearly struggling with his own emotions. Behind them, parishioners had gathered in the hallway, silently witnessing the exchange. Father Carter took another step toward Officer Mercer, his gaze both resolute and understanding. You came here looking for something wrong, he said. You assumed guilt before you considered innocence. You acted out of fear, out of prejudice, or perhaps both. But let me ask you this, what would happen if you saw people with the dignity you would want others to see in you? Officer Mercer swallowed hard, his eyes shifting between the priest and the two homeless men. The younger man stirred slightly, his gaze wary, but the older man leaned back in his chair, his face marked by the hardships of life. Yet his eyes remained sharp and unwavering. Officer Mercer, the older man, suddenly spoke, his voice rough but steady. Have you ever truly been hungry? I don't mean missing a meal, I mean hunger that lasts for days. Officer Mercer flinched at the question but didn't answer. Because I have, the man continued. And I'll tell you this, when you're that hungry, a place like this isn't just a church. It's a miracle. It's the only reason I'm alive today. The younger man nodded silently, his hands trembling as he clutched his cup. Father Carter placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder before turning back to Officer Mercer. These people and so many others come here because they have nowhere else to go, he said. And we welcome them with open arms, not with suspicion or judgment. Officer Mercer shifted uncomfortably, the authority he carried beginning to erode in the face of the truth before him. But before he could respond, Father Carter said something that left everyone stunned. Officer Ryan Mercer, he said, his voice softer. Now I invite you to sit with us, have a cup of coffee, meet the people you saw as a threat, listen to their stories. Perhaps then you'll understand why this church represents something far greater than what you first assumed. The congregation gasped softly, murmurs spreading through the hallway. Officer Mercer looked at Father Carter, clearly torn between pride and the unexpected invitation. You want me to sit with them? He asked, his voice uncertain. I do, Father Carter nodded. Because this isn't just about me or them, or even you. It's about breaking the cycle of fear and prejudice. It's about seeing each other as human beings. The room fell silent. Officer Mercer glanced at the two men, then back at Father Carter. His shoulders seemed to relax slightly, and he exhaled a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He stood motionless for what felt like an eternity, his gaze flickering between conflicting emotions, pride against shame, authority against vulnerability. The entire room held its breath, waiting for his answer. Finally, he took a deep breath, removed his hat, and ran his hand through his hair. He looked at Father Carter, and his expression softened. "All right?" he said in a husky voice. "I'll sit down." A collective sigh swept through the congregation as Officer Mercer slowly made his way to the small table. The young man appeared tense, his eyes searching Father Carter for reassurance. The priest gave a slight nod, and the young man exhaled shakily, relaxing just a bit. Officer Mercer pulled out a chair. The chair's legs scraped against the wooden floor with a jarring sound as he sat opposite the two men. His posture remained stiff and awkward, yet he did not stand up. Father Carter stepped to the table, poured a cup of coffee, and set it before Officer Mercer. "You said you wanted to see what was behind that door," Father Carter said, his voice gentle yet resolute. "Now you're seeing it. These men are not criminals. They are not a threat. They are not a threat. They are human beings just like you, just like me. They each have their own story. Why don't you listen to them?" Officer Mercer hesitated, his hand hovering over the cup. He glanced at the older man, whose steady, almost challenging gaze held his attention. "My name is Thomas Hall," the older man finally broke the silence. "I used to work in construction. I lost my job after an injury, and then I lost my home because I couldn't pay my bills. That happened 12 years ago. Since then, I've been living on the streets." The younger man spoke up, his voice just loud enough to be heard. "I'm Darnell Wright. I left the orphanage at 19 with nowhere to go. I tried to make it on my own," but he hesitated, his shoulders slumping. "Life isn't as easy as I once thought." Officer Mercer's expression gradually softened as he listened, the rigidity in his demeanor giving way to a hint of remorse. He nodded slightly, his eyes shifting between the two men. "I don't know," he murmured, almost to himself. Father Carter sat down and interlaced his fingers on the table. "You don't know," he said in a calm yet firm tone. "But you assumed, and that assumption led you into this church and condemned an entire community. Do you realize how dangerous that is?" Officer Mercer swallowed hard, his face ashen. "I see it now," he said softly. I was wrong." The room fell utterly silent. The congregation watched with a mix of relief and astonishment. Officer Mercer's admission hung heavily in the air. For the first time since entering the church, he no longer looked like an officer but like a human being, capable of error and change. He sat there staring at the untouched cup of coffee, feeling the weight of the moment press down upon him. The room was silent except for the occasional creak of wooden floorboards as parishioners shifted, waiting to see what would happen next. Father Carter leaned slightly forward, his voice gentle, yet resonant with the depth of a person of profound faith. "Admitting that you were wrong is the first step, officer," he began. "It isn't easy, and it takes courage. But understanding why you were wrong, that is what will change your heart and your actions." Officer Mercer looked up, his green eyes meeting Father Carter's steady gaze. "I guess I let my prejudices guide me," he admitted. "I thought I was protecting everyone. But maybe I didn't see the whole picture. I was afraid." Father Carter nodded, his eyes filled with compassion. "Fear is powerful. It blinds us and makes us see threats where none exist. But the good news is that every day we have a chance to see things differently, to replace fear with understanding and prejudice with compassion." Officer Mercer swallowed hard, his throat tightening slightly. He looked around the room, and for the first time he didn't just see faces but real people. People who came to this church seeking comfort, guidance, and community. For the first time he no longer regarded them as strangers, but as fellow human beings. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low but sincere, "to you, Father, and to everyone here. I was in the wrong." The congregation murmured in astonishment. Some nodded in agreement while others exchanged looks of relief. Father Carter smiled, warmth spreading throughout the room. "Your apology is accepted," he said, "but words must be accompanied by actions, officer. Use your position to build bridges, not walls. Serve with compassion, not suspicion." Officer Mercer slowly nodded, as if a heavy invisible burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He stood up and scanned the room. "I will do better," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "Thank you for this, for everything." Father Carter also stood and extended his hand. "Go in peace, officer. And remember, the door of this church is always open to everyone, including you." Officer Mercer grasped Father Carter's hand firmly, as if conveying a silent promise. Then he turned and walked back down the hallway toward the main area of the church. The light streaming through the vibrant stained glass windows seemed to soften the outline of his departing figure. As the door closed behind him, the congregation broke into applause. Not noisy or exuberant, but a sincere, gentle show of support. Father Carter turned back to the two men sitting at the table, his smile widening. "And you, my sons," he said, looking at Thomas Hall and Darnell Wright, "always remember that you are not alone. This is your home." The young man wiped his eyes discreetly and nodded in silence, while Thomas Hall leaned back in his chair, a rare grateful smile tugging at his lips. The congregation began to gather, exchanging words of encouragement, handshakes, and embraces. For Father Carter, this moment was not a victory, but a transformation. In one afternoon, a seed of change had been planted not just in Officer Ryan Mercer, but in everyone who had witnessed what had transpired. The church in Boise, Idaho, once a place of quiet and refuge, had become a beacon of resilience, compassion, and hope. And as Father Carter looked out at his community more united than ever, he knew that even in the face of prejudice and fear, love and understanding could prevail. Through this story, we learn that prejudice doesn't just blur the lines of justice, it can turn those entrusted to protect into threats to the very communities they are meant to serve. But what makes this story truly powerful is its message of change, that anyone can relearn how to see the world, as long as they have the humility to listen and the courage to make things right. Starting today, we can take small steps, refusing to look away from injustice, asking questions instead of making judgments, and opening our hearts to understand others rather than fear them. In the next 5 years, we can be voices for meaningful reform in law, in education, and in how we teach our children about kindness and equality. Because change doesn't happen on its own, it begins with each of us every single day. Disclaimer: this story is entirely fictional and created for the purpose of awareness. It highlights issues of accountability, justice, and the importance of treating everyone with respect and dignity. We firmly stand against violence, prejudice, and injustice in all forms. Viewer discretion is advised.